So we're back again with another Mad Max challenge run, brought to you by this lovely commenter. And if you want to help me out by leaving a comment for my next challenge, the comment section is always free. Anyways folks, what the heck are we getting into today? Well, I'm going to be playing through Mad Max the way it was always intended to be played. On foot. That's right, we're taking the Opus and tossing it right into the trash. To be honest, I'm not even sure why vehicles even exist in this world in the first place, especially when gasoline is such a precious and finite resource. So today, I'm going eco-friendly and doing my part against the growing environmental crisis we're all living in and putting my foot down, literally, to fight back and reclaim this earth. Let's get into it. So, actually, this story is going to pick up right after the prologue sequences, since we all know by now that the game forces you to use the Opus to complete the various tasks presented. And also, at this point in the story, it's the only vehicle I have access to, so even if I wanted to, I could not get around using it. So, anyway, jumping ahead, we're now saying goodbye to our beloved Sanctum, and I'm leaving it to be blown up by Stankum's Legion. Now, my original plan was going to be using any car that I came across out in the wastelands that wasn't the Opus, but I decided against that as it didn't really end up changing the gameplay all that much, and after investing about an hour or so into this save file, I just decided to start a new game, get past the prologue, and then continue on foot from here on out. So my first stop after leaving the Sanctum, as always, was to go to the scouting balloon located just inside the Great White. And after thoroughly scanning the region, I began my 8-minute trek over to Jeet's. Upon my arrival, I was notified that I was required to have Chum with me to get inside, so I shot a flare up into the sky, and he responded to it, allowing me to progress inside. After a brief talk with Jeet, I left his stronghold and began hobbling over to the Balefire Flatlands to grab this area's balloon. Then begrudgingly began my miles-long journey over to Dead Baron's Pass to scout out the Jaw. And man, if I thought this walk was long back when I was writing my notes, I sure as hell had a few surprises ahead of me. I climbed up to the top of the lighthouse to scout out the Jaw, and afterwards ran back over to Jeet's, collected a few wasteland missions, then set off to the Wreck Hill oil transfer camp to destroy it as a favor to Jeet. Getting into these early camps without the Opus is a relatively easy endeavor. The perimeter defenses are limited, and the secret entrances are pretty easily accessed. And just as easily as I got in, I had dismantled the camp, and all the enemies would now be replaced with friends. Wreck Hill was now dealt with, but I still had some threat reducing to do in this territory, so I did the only logical thing and went over to the next closest camp on the map, Bonecrack. As I approached this camp, a storm began ravaging through the area and tried making my life more difficult than it already was. Bonecrack, unfortunately, presented me with this dilemma. There was a weak gate blocking my super secret entrance, and just punching it wasn't yielding me any tangible results. Well, so here's the thing. I could call the Opus over here and only use it for its grappling hook, but that just seemed too cheap of an out this early on. However, I did notice that there was an intact buzzard vehicle parked nearby, so I ran over to that, hopped inside, and planned to use it to ram the weak gate out of the way. Well, unbeknownst to me, as I'd gotten inside the car and turned around to face my target, the storm had apparently blown the gate over for me, and I was free to go inside. So much for making my life difficult. This camp was much more straightforward than the last, and it's another one of those oil pump camps. So I basically just needed to get in deep enough with something explosive and blow them up. Simple enough. After this camp was complete, I was now pretty close to reaching the Sanctum to rescue Dinky D and finish one of my wasteland missions. This mission will be one of the only times I will be using any kind of vehicle in this run, and I'm making this exception solely for Dinky D. And if you disagree, you're gonna sit there and tell me that if you were in my shoes, you would have left him behind? Right. Didn't fucking think so. Once Dinky D was back safe and sound at Jeet's, I set out to locate the car body that I needed to build up the jack. I was actually pretty stunned at the fact that I didn't run into any enemy cars on the road wanting to run me over. I mean, sure, I passed some here and there, but they never stopped to fuck with me. However, I did struggle to kill the one dude wielding a weapon at the POI the car body was located at, simply because my dumbass was too stupid and forgot to purchase the perk for Mac that lets me parry their attacks. Anyway, now that I had the car body I was after, I needed a way to get my money up, and this nearby camp seemed like a prime location to start hunting. Well, that's a good start. Yeah, no way I'm getting close. Instead, I turned my attention to the local scavenging locations, and turns out I did get a decent amount of scrap in this process, and would eventually come to another enemy camp in the distance. And I figured it would be a pretty easy one to get in and clear, and maybe full of extra scrap. Fuck this, I'm going to the balloon. I was already pretty darn close to my goal of 300 scrap, and I just really came here to scope out the rest of the area, but thought maybe that I'd also find something of value lying around. And turns out, as luck would have it, this POI actually had enough scrap inside of it for me to reach my goal, and I was now able to complete the jack. Well, for the most part. Now once the jack was nearly built, I was pointed by Jeet towards Gut Gash's stronghold, which was about a 2 to 3 minute drive from Jeet's, but remember, I'm not allowed to drive. So this entire trek took a total of 15 minutes in real time to get to. Damn. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I was on TikTok for like the majority of this run. Anyways, as soon as I got to Gut Gash's, I could simply loot the welding wire I needed and officially complete the jack. And once I'd finished that up, Gut Gash would have a mission for me. A mission tasking me with acquiring a special part he needed from Dimrim so he could build the weapon I needed for the Opus. Oh, as well as needing to lower the threat in his territory too, much like I did for Jeet. So I took off and stopped by the first enemy camp I came across upon leaving. It was a camp called Rook's Nest, and fuck me did I struggle with it. Not only did I wander around the perimeter of this fucking camp for far too long looking for the secret entrance, but I also was in such a rush to complete this camp that I died more times than I'm ever going to admit. Oh, and that's not even mentioning that the secret entrance to this camp was on the complete other side of where it would spawn me after each death, and why I didn't move on sooner, I don't know, man. Either way, Rook's Nest was now liberated, and I'd done enough work in Gut Gash's territory that he was ready to work with me. Well, except I still needed to get that part from Dimrim. Now, you may be asking yourself, how in the hell are you planning to take out a convoy on foot? Well, let me show you. So, on one of my early attempts, in a stroke of luck, 2 randomly spawned enemy vehicles would start trying to run me down as soon as I'd made it to the convoy route. I'd baited them into getting out of their vehicles so I could then dispose of them and begin strategically positioning their cars across the middle of the convoy route. And yes, sure, I did call upon the Opus for some extra support here, but I'm not technically using it, it's just, parked there. Now, I knew I wasn't going to get the convoy down on its first pass through here. 1, because I simply didn't have enough ammo, and 2, because I didn't have enough of the path block to really fully jam up this convoy. All I was really after here was more empty cars to add to my blockade. Although, on this first pass, I did shoot the target car to get a feel for how much damage I could potentially do to it, and how much ammo I would actually need if I did go down that route. I unfortunately didn't manage to get any extra cars here because my blockade didn't end up working very well, so after a redesign, I once again waited for them to come back around. This time, I got one to drive off course and into some boulders, allowing me to hop inside and scoop it up for myself. Time to add it to my pileup and wait once more. This next time around, it worked like a charm and stopped them dead in their tracks. I tried to pull Dimrim out of his vehicle, but the game doesn't really allow for that, and one of his buddies ended up pushing me far away from their leader with his car. I decided for this next attempt that I would move my blockade to a more narrow part of this road, thinking that this would be a more effective location. And holy shit was it! This was, by far, the most effective chance at securing this objective, and I, of course, managed to fuck it all up. How so? Well, see, I actually looted one single shotgun shell from one of the many enemies I would punch into the dirt during this sequence, and keep in mind, I already knew that one shell was not enough to blow up the red barrels in the back of this truck. So, Do you think that I did the logical thing and disabled the truck by shooting its tire out? Or do you think that I'm a dumbass who decided to shoot the red barrels again, fully knowing the outcome? Well, wasn't that just a bit too obvious to be considered foreshadowing? The AI eventually figured its shit out and finally would ram through my blockade and off again to regain its health back. Fuck me. At least I now had a ton of cars here to bolster my defenses. Wait, what the fuck? Well, apparently that happens. Well, that certainly changes things. I had tried a few more times, got a few more cars, repeating the same shit over and over again, until I eventually would succumb to my wounds and be revived back at Gut Gashes. This time I made sure to get some ammo before heading over there. And apparently I needed even more than 2 shots to take this lead vehicle down. After I expended my 2 shots, I was done. I hopped onto the Ripper type vehicle and ran that bitch down, finally putting an end to Dim Rim, all without the Opus. That was until I decided that that method was a little too cheap and a little too much use of a vehicle. I knew I could do better. So I reloaded one of my backup save files, this time armed with a full ammo belt. I got this. Lucky for me, in this attempt, I was able to steal one of the convoy vehicles during the first pass through this area. Then, a couple of dudes from a roadkill faction spotted me as the convoy was away, so I was able to kill them both for their vehicles and really get a solid barricade set up for the convoy's next visit. I have 3 shells on me. As long as I could get them semi-stuck, this should be easy. So, when they came around the corner once again, my barricade worked its magic and ended up causing the convoy lead to get stuck shifting gears back and forth, trying to find a way around this impervious wall of cars. Everything was going perfect. While he did this, I took the liberty of walking over there and shooting the gas tank a total of 2 times. Well, it needed 1 more shot to blow up, and that's all I had left. So I readied my weapon, I aimed, and I fired. And somehow, it didn't fucking land. What the actual fuck? I was done. That was until the flames spewing out from its ass started damaging its crew's abandoned vehicles around it and started causing explosions to happen, damaging him ever so slightly. This gave me an idea. I began driving cars into the fire and flames, bailing before taking any damage myself, and being very careful not to damage the car by ramming it. And after a few cars had rolled over there, success. Now that I had the components crafted from Gut Gash, all I needed to do was head back over to Jeet's, install the Thunderpoon, and officially complete the Jag. Now, when it comes to taking down the jaw, I believe I read somewhere that there are a couple ways to go about this without the Opus. And I could go about finding and hauling like 5 separate gas cans to this area to take out all 3 of the launchers, plus the 2 locks holding shut the jaw. But in the end, I'd still need to pull it down with the Opus's harpoon. So, since I'm not allowed to drive around and find all 5 of these gas cans, I abandoned that plan and instead just used the flare to call the Opus over to the various locations of my targets, then hopped in and fired a Thunderpoon from it. In the end, it wasn't all that hard of a sequence, though, as I explained earlier, the masochism meter could have been elevated more, but I really wasn't willing to take that on. I've already spent literal hours walking. Oh, and the enemy cars in here are easy enough to trick into exiting their vehicles, so I dealt with them before doing any of this. Once the jaw was down, I was able to hop back out of the Opus and make a break for it into Pink Eye's territory, but stopped off at the first balloon I came across in order to fly up and scope out Nitsack, then got back on track. I'd now finally reached the stronghold, but now I needed to deal with all the invading Stankgum Legion before I could get inside and drive them all out. I used the thunder sticks located at the first catapult to begin taking out the 5 cars aimlessly driving around, then got to work on the catapults themselves. After they were reduced to rubble, I made my way through the army of warboys, up some ladders, and finally into Pink Eye's stronghold. There were, if you could believe it, even more enemies in here to deal with, and it was even a solid 6v1 in their favor. Too bad their favor meant dick. I settled the score with these guys expeditiously and successfully drove off Stankgum and his crew. After Pink Eye was safe, I instantly began my long trek over to Gastown to meet with the Outcrier. However, I would make a small pit stop along the way. Through my practice with kind of dabbling into speedrunning this game, I knew that taking out the top dog camp in this area was going to do wonders towards my future pursuit in lowering Scrotus's threat down to 3. And after rushing through this camp and putting a stop to their leader, just watch at how much this camp will lower the threat level. I continued on my way over to Gastown after my victory, eventually making it into the dump region. And of course, making another pit stop at the single balloon found in this area. And I guess I didn't mention it earlier, but I used these balloons as fast travel points if and only if I died on a long journey from point A to point B. So, for example, if I died right before making it into Gastown, I'd end up respawning back at Pink Eyes. So, instead of starting back from here, I'd allow myself to travel to the balloon and pick it up from there. Got it? Cool. Sure enough, as I was making my way over to Gastown from the balloon, a storm ended up rolling in and I was in some serious danger. I tried my best to navigate the terrain in such a way that I could hopefully mitigate as much of it as possible, but just as I was crossing the bridge into Gastown, a scrap piece of sheet metal came hurling into my back, ending me literally outside the fucking gates. Okay, reloading back to the balloon, this next attempt got me there safe and sound, and I could finally talk with the Outcrier for my next mission. Now, in order to get into the races, the Outcrier requested that I head into the Underdune for him and find him some decorative lights to spruce up his life with. Okay, if I have to. The only hurdle on my way over there was this big gate blocking the path into the Great Nothing, but getting through it was as simple as shooting literally any of the 100 red barrels they have strategically placed around the area. Big boom, make fence go bye-bye, and I can continue through the tunnel and into relative safety. There are literally 0 enemies out in this deserted part of the wasteland, so there's really nothing much from here except a lot of running and some scrolling on TikTok. Once I'd arrived at the entrance to the Underdune, I was required to use the Opus once again to rip down the gates and get inside. And not only this, but the majority of this underground sequence requires it as well. Of course, at the behest of the game. Trust me, I tried. So let's just move on and skip to my fight with the buzzards after finding the lights I was in here for. I've had plenty of time in the past invested into this fight, especially in my weapons only run of this game. So, honestly, after a few minor upgrades to max, it was, by all accounts, a pretty straightforward fight. As per usual, I'd end up beating on these guys until the exit door would swing open, then I'd be free to return to the Opus. Again, at the behest of the game itself. Once I was clear of the Underdune though, I was safe to finally exit the Opus and continue forest gumping my way through the wasteland and back to Gastown. Though, somewhere along the way, I would get bullied into dying by a crackshot sniper. However, this was actually pretty helpful, as this death would have me spawning back at my destination, saving me the hassle of a few thousand more steps. If only I would have known that sooner. Now that I had the Outcrier's blessing, I could now head over to Crowdazzle's domain and speak with him about this race I was attempting to enter. However, I would get sidetracked a little bit in order to complete a wasteland mission that was on my path over here. This was more of a product of convenience more than anything. I needed to do another wasteland mission for a future request, and this one was right here. After securing the max mag for the sniper rifle, I was out of this buzzard den and back on my path to Crowdazzle's. Once I'd met with him, then Tenderloin, then him again, I was now in charge of reducing the threat in Pink Eye's territory down to 3. Which, if you remember, is why I did that top dog camp earlier. Now I should only have to clear like 1 more camp for it to be enough. And let me tell you, I tried so hard to get into the closest camp next to Crowdazzle's. You know, the one located on the bridge. But unfortunately, this camp's defenses were nearly impenetrable for a Max whose only mode of transportation are his feet. Eventually, I'd give up after randomly being spawned back at Pink Eye's stronghold, so I decided to switch up to a different camp completely. Havoc Point. This is kinda just a super small camp that should have been relatively simple. It's basically just a horde mode of enemies for a little while before the gates would open up to the oil pumps and I could go in to blow them up. Unfortunately, after doing all of that, I was wrong. This camp barely put a dent in the threat level of this area, so I was off to find yet another camp I could clear out and hopefully rectify this bullshit. The next closest camp was Stronghold, another oil pump camp. Getting inside was as simple as climbing the rocks right next to the big gate meant to keep the people out. I fought my way down to the pump, hucked a burning gas tank at it, then sent the thing up in a ball of flames, finally getting that threat down to 3. Now that that was done, it was time to get a special paint job from a dude named Rimjobby. And no, I'm not kidding. He was the leader of a top dog camp over in Gut Gash's territory, aka a long ass walk away. Getting inside this camp is kind of a tricky one. I couldn't spot any secret passages I could slip through on foot along the perimeter, so the only option I could see was to use the harpoon to release one of the ladders out front, allowing me to climb up and into the camp. Yeah, I know, I used the Opus. Sue me. I didn't waste too much time fighting the little peons of this camp, only fighting who I had to conserve every little bit of my health. And lo and behold, Rimjobby is thankfully one of the easiest top dog fights in this game. But that might be due to the fact that there's always plenty of melee weapons lying around the arena, making this guy child's play. Since I didn't end up going with the Wild Hunt car body for this run, I was now in charge of acquiring it, as it's needed to complete the speed demon. And this body was all the way on the opposite side of Gut Gash's territory. Dope. I love running in a straight line for 20 minutes at a time. Once I had that in my possession, I needed some more scrap. Like a lot of it. I needed a total of 1,600 scrap, and at this point, I had roughly around 600. Now, I spent most of my time looking for this scrap at any of the scavenging locations that would pop up on my minimap while I was still roaming around Gut Gash's territory. And in my time looting, I took out Black Cove, Overlook, and was working on the dredges before realizing I'd hit my goal and I could finally upgrade my ride. Oh, and I did kinda cheat a little bit again and take the scrapulence from Overlook back to Jeet's for its scrap. But I told you about it, so now I feel less bad. Once the speed demon was complete, I just needed to run my sorry ass back over to Crowdazzle's to begin the race. Mind you, I'm still in Gut Gash's territory. This was gonna be another long ass journey. Now, let's be real. I can't complete this race without driving, so we're just gonna move on from it. Cool? Cool. After the race was concluded and I had won, obviously, I hopped back out of my ride and began walking all the way back up to Crowdazzle's again to finally recruit Tenderloin into running the race against Stankgum with me. Then, after all of that, it was all the way back to Gastown for me. Now, remember back to the first time that I ever played this game? This was one of the most difficult sections for me. That may have been in part due to the fact that I was doing a no upgrade run, but regardless, my point in bringing that up is that it's no longer that looming threat to me. Right, says the guy who finished the race with nearly 0 health. Shut up. As for the Tenderloin fight, yeah. As long as I could endlessly trap her into doing the move that I could parry, and avoid the ones that I couldn't, it's a cake fight. And, you know, pretty much same goes for the 2 Scrotus fights as well. I mean, as long as I was efficient with my looted melee weapons, Scrotus is an easy dub. The first phase of his fight has all these red barrels that his dumbass could eventually be lured into charging into, and the second phase is just a game of whack-a-scrow. Now, remember when I did those wasteland missions earlier? Yeah, that was in preparation for the 2 requirements I needed to start my next mission. Since the wasteland missions were now complete, all I needed to do was the second half of the requirements, building 2 projects and deep fry a stronghold. I didn't have the parts to build anything just yet, but a couple quick trips to a couple scavenging locations along the way would yield me the 2 project parts I needed. Once those were in my back pocket, I hustled over to Freya's to build both the survey crew and scrap crew projects before leaving back to Gastown with Hope. Wait, I lied. I still had one more wasteland mission to complete before I could move on. But this could be easily completed just outside of Gastown. Just go down some pipes, find Chum's Holy Wrench, and get the fuck out. You don't even really need to fight anyone down here. Though, I did, since I didn't feel like dealing with them on my way out. Now, after talking with Hope, she lets me through a locked door, which is a secret pathway that took me to where Stankgum was keeping his ride. I still had to punch my way through a few groups of enemies before I could get my hands on it, but after taking them out and refueling the lift that it was on, I could steal Stankgum's Big Chief and ride it all the way back to Deep Fry's to gut it for its V8. I was now headed back out to the dunes on a search to locate and protect Hope's daughter, Glory. She told me that her daughter would be with an old man, and if I could just locate him, I'd find her. Well, the old man, didn't make it. But there were some fresh tire tracks leading down into the Underdune, so I followed them inside and began making my way down into the depths of the buzzards' dig sites. After punching through a few groups of buzzards and having no luck searching the dig sites I looked in, I'd suddenly feel an earthquake and hear a child screaming in the distance. So I followed it. I eventually found Glory in a chest freezer tucked away in the back room, but after finding her and carrying her out to safety, a gang of buzzards and their boss showed up to see if they could put a stop to us. The main target in this fight is the big dude with a health bar, and really all the little guys would do would just keep respawning if I focused on them too much. So, for this fight, I used whatever weapons I could find on the ground to knock him upside the head. But once they were all used up, I resorted to farming fury off the little guys so I could use it against the big guy. Once he was down, Gloria and I loaded up on the horse they rode in on and took off back to Deep Fry's to reunite her with her mother. Now it was time for yet another miles-long journey from Deep Fry's down to the Sanctum to confront Chum for leaving me in the dust. Upon my arrival, I would find Chum in the Opus, but also a surprise challenger, Stankgum. Time for another boss fight. As with pretty much any fight with any health bar in this game, I needed to wait for the parryable attack, then strike while the iron was hot until they'd snap back and began blocking again. And after this fight was over, guess what I got to do after walking all the way to the Sanctum from Deep Fry's? Well, I got to walk back, of course. And then, as if this was some sick joke to the game developers who definitely intended for their game to be played like this, I had to walk all the way from the most western part of Pink Eyes all the way to Gastown, which, for those of you who don't know, is on the easternmost part of the map. Once I did eventually get there though, I would get the information I needed on Scrotus's whereabouts from his blood bag and moved on into the finale of the game. And after all of this, after everything, this finale is not possible on foot. Its literal design is that of a vehicle combat scenario. So, yeah, this is where the run ends, I guess, at the end. But, I will say, the very last sequence where I'm actually killing Scrotus is done on foot. That's right, baby. We did it. Woo! Okay, but in all seriousness, is Mad Max totally doable without the Opus? No, not really. But minimizing the use of it really changes how you play this game. The entire design of its open world area is really for the express purpose of being inside of a vehicle. So exploring some of the systems in place from on foot was definitely interesting to say the least. I thought that this run was literally going to just be a patience and endurance challenge, and the only additional difference it would bring is all the extra time I spent running, and it did, but beyond that, it actually ended up being a bit more than that. And I would actually encourage you to explore the wasteland of this game on foot from time to time. Definitely not the whole game though. Yes, it takes a while, but keep in mind that not every open world game has vehicles to take you from point A to point B. And some games are designed with that express purpose. But anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed this one. Leave my next challenge in the comment below. I hope you enjoyed your meal if you were eating. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.